We begin at the News Now desk. The defense rests in the third day of a hearing for a teen charged with killing 10-year-old Lily Peters of Chippewa Falls. The hearing is to decide whether the 15-year-old boy charged in her death should continue to be tried as an adult or if the case should be moved to juvenile court. The defense called 3 witnesses today, including a retired professor with more than 30 years of experience as an expert witness in criminal cases involving issues of violence and children. He testified that the suspect shows signs of poor decision-making and impulse control, saying he believes the boy would do better in juvenile detention, given he has no history of violence and shows signs of depression.
Most juveniles who commit homicide should not be dealt with in the juvenile court. They should be dealt with because they need these 20 years of time. And I think the implication of that is that most reverse waivers should be rejected. But this is an exception that should be accepted.
The final witness called by the defense today, the psychology director with the Wisconsin Department of Corrections, supported prior statements saying there are 100,000 people in adult correctional facilities in need of mental health support. The defense and the state both have rested their cases. The judge says he will rule on the motion no later than January 8th of 2024.